Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel tonight. I want you to imagine the sound first. The steady rhythm of steel wheels on iron rails. The low groan of a train stretching through the darkness, moving between places most people forget once they arrive. Trains are supposed to be safe, predictable, guided by fixed tracks and strict schedules. But sometimes those same rails become corridors of fear, carrying stories that don't want to stay buried. What you're about to hear are 3 true train horror stories. No legends, no exaggeration, just moments where something went terribly wrong and the people who lived through them were never the same again. The first story begins late at night, somewhere in Eastern Europe, in the winter of the early 1990s. The train was an overnight sleeper running between 2 industrial cities, the kind that workers and students used regularly. Inside the compartments, the lights were dim and yellow, casting long shadows across worn seats and narrow bunks. Most passengers had already settled in. The conductor had checked the tickets, locked the external doors between cars, and the train pushed on through forests and frozen countryside. In one compartment were 4 strangers, a middle-aged man returning home from a factory shift, a young woman in her early 20s traveling to visit family, an elderly lady who barely spoke, and a teenage boy wearing headphones and staring out into the dark. They exchanged the polite, tired nods of people who had no intention of talking all night. As the train gained speed, the outside world disappeared completely. There were no lights, no houses, just blackness. About an hour into the journey, the young woman noticed something strange. The door connecting their compartment to the corridor slowly slid open. That wasn't unusual by itself, but no one was standing there. She assumed someone had just passed and the door hadn't fully closed. She reached over and slid it shut again, the metal clacking softly as it locked. 10 minutes later, the door opened again. This time, the elderly lady noticed too. She frowned, whispering something under her breath. The middle-aged man leaned over and shut the door more forcefully, checking the latch. It was secure. The train continued to rumble through the night. A third time, the door opened. Now everyone was alert. The teenager pulled off his headphones. They stared at the empty doorway, the narrow corridor outside lit by flickering fluorescent lights. No footsteps. No movement, just the open door, swaying slightly with the motion of the train. That was when they heard breathing. It didn't come from inside their compartment. It came from the corridor, slow and uneven, like someone struggling to draw air. The sound was low, almost hidden beneath the noise of the rails, but once they heard it, they couldn't unhear it. The young woman felt her skin crawl. The middle-aged man stood up, his voice shaking as he called out, asking if someone needed help. There was no answer. The breathing stopped. For several seconds there was only silence. Then something scraped against the metal floor outside, slowly, deliberately, as if someone was dragging themselves forward. The elderly lady began to cry quietly, clutching her coat. The teenager froze, eyes wide, unable to move. Suddenly, a shape appeared in the doorway. It was a man, thin to the point of looking skeletal, his clothes torn and filthy. His face was pale, lips cracked and bleeding, his eyes unfocused as if he could barely see. He didn't stand properly. He leaned against the frame, swaying with the train, mouth opening and closing without sound. The middle-aged man shouted for the conductor, but before he could move, the figure collapsed forward, landing half inside the compartment. The smell hit them immediately, rot, sweat, and blood. The young woman screamed as she scrambled backward. The man on the floor was still alive, but barely. It turned out later that he had boarded the train hours earlier without a ticket and hidden himself between cars. When the train picked up speed, he slipped, becoming trapped under the carriage, clinging to metal beams while being dragged for miles. He had somehow pulled himself back up through a maintenance hatch and crawled into the corridor, unseen by the staff. Emergency brakes were pulled. The train came to a violent stop in the middle of nowhere. By the time help arrived, the man was dead. What haunted the passengers most wasn't just how close they had come to him. It was the realization that for hours, while they slept and talked and stared into the dark, a dying man had been clinging to the underside of their train, screaming into the night where no one could hear him. The second story takes us to India in the early 2000s on a crowded, long-distance passenger train that ran through rural regions and major cities alike. This was not a sleeper train, but one packed with people at all hours. Vendors walked the aisles selling tea and snacks. Families sat squeezed together with luggage stacked overhead. The noise never really stopped. Among the passengers was a man traveling alone, somewhere in his late 30s. He had boarded at a smaller station late in the evening, choosing an upper berth near the end of one of the coaches. He told other passengers he was heading to a job interview in a large city several hours away. He seemed polite but distracted, frequently glancing toward the doors connecting the cars. As night fell, the train slowed as it passed through isolated stretches of track, forests, empty fields, long sections without stations. Most people dozed, their bodies swaying gently with the motion. Around midnight, a woman sitting near the aisle noticed the man climb down from his berth. He moved quietly, almost nervously, and stood near the door leading to the next car. She assumed he was going to the restroom or to get water. He didn't come back. An hour passed, then another. The woman thought little of it until she saw a conductor checking tickets and asked him if a man had changed cars. The conductor frowned. No one should have been moving between cars while the train was at full speed. It was dangerous, sometimes fatal. They searched nearby compartments. The man was gone. No luggage missing. No signs of struggle. The conductor reported it to the driver, but without proof, the train continued to its next stop. At dawn, the train finally halted at a major station. As passengers disembarked, railway workers walked the length of the train, performing routine checks. Near the rear of the train, one of them screamed. The missing man's body was discovered hanging from the underside of the last coach, tangled in cables and metal rods. His hands were torn and bleeding. His face was frozen in an expression of pure terror. The investigation revealed what likely happened. The man had stepped between cars while the train was moving, possibly trying to smoke or relieve himself in secret. A sudden jolt or loss of balance caused him to slip. Instead of falling away, he grabbed onto the undercarriage, clinging for dear life as the train raced onward. No one heard his screams. The wheels and engine drowned out everything. For hours, passengers laughed, slept, and drank tea, completely unaware that a man was being dragged beneath them, slowly losing his grip, his strength, and finally his life. Railway workers who handled the body later admitted something that still chills people to this day. When they finally removed him, his fingers were worn down almost to the bone, nails missing entirely, proof that until the very end he never let go. The third story is perhaps the most unsettling of all, not because of an accident, but because of what people claim they saw. This takes place in the United States on a suburban commuter rail line in the late 1970s. The route passed through several quiet towns and wooded areas, with trains running early in the morning and late into the night. One particular stretch of track had a dark history. Decades earlier, a deadly collision had occurred there, killing multiple passengers when a freight train failed to stop in time. Officially, the wreck was cleared, the tracks repaired, and the line reopened. But train crews whispered about that section for years. One winter evening, a nearly empty commuter train was running late. Snow had slowed everything, and visibility was poor. The conductor and engineer were both seasoned professionals who knew the line well. As they approached the infamous stretch, the engineer noticed something ahead on the tracks. At first, it looked like people, dozens of them, figures standing motionless along the rails, some directly in the train's path. The engineer slammed the brakes and blasted the horn, shouting to the conductor. The train screeched to a halt, wheels shrieking against the tracks. The conductor ran forward, heart pounding, expecting the worst. But when they stepped outside, there was nothing there, no people, no footprints in the snow, nothing but empty tracks and cold air. They assumed it was a trick of the light and continued on. Over the next several months, similar reports came in from different crews. Shadowy figures appearing near that exact location, people sitting on the tracks, faces pressed against windows of empty cars late at night. Every time the train stopped, there was nothing to be found. Then one night, a conductor made a discovery that changed everything. During a routine check after stopping near the haunted stretch, he noticed frost forming strangely along one car. It wasn't random. It outlined shapes, like handprints and faces, pressed from the inside out. The car was supposed to be empty. When they opened it, the temperature inside was freezing, far colder than outside. The railroad quietly investigated, but found no physical explanation. Eventually, schedules were adjusted to reduce late night travel along that section. To this day, retired workers still talk about it. They say that on the coldest nights, if a train slows down in the wrong place, you can still see them. Passengers from the wreck that never made it home, waiting on the tracks, repeating the final moments they can't escape. Trains are meant to carry us forward safely and reliably on paths that never change. But these stories remind us that even the most controlled systems can become scenes of unimaginable horror. Steel tracks don't forget what happens on them. They remember the screams, the accidents, the lives cut short. And sometimes when the night is quiet enough, those memories come back. So the next time you step onto a train late at night, listen carefully to the sounds around you, the creak of metal, the rush of wind. And if you hear something else, something that doesn't belong, maybe it's just your imagination, or maybe it's one of the many stories still riding the rails. Thank you for listening. If these true train horror stories kept you on edge, make sure to stay safe wherever you are tonight. Until next time, take care, and I'll see you in the next video.